flag in support of Hezbollah. He's due in court next month. It's after police assessed a video reported to be from one of the group's concerts. So Keir Starmer suggested he could U-turn on winter fuel payments. The Prime Minister's told MPs he wants more pensioners to be eligible. And logistics and tech companies are being warned of a campaign of Russian cyber attacks. The National Cyber Security Centre says those involved in foreign assistance to Ukraine should be particularly careful. In the city, the FTSE 100's closed up 5 points, 87.86. The pound buys $1.34 and €1.18. LBC weather, light rain for south-east Scotland and eastern England tonight, a low of -1. From Global's newsroom, for LBC, I'm Daryl Jackson.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
It is a panel of debutants tonight, ladies and gentlemen, with one exception, and I'm going to let you guess who it is. We have with us on Cross Question Saqib, Bhatti, who is Conservative Shadow Culture Minister, MP for Meriden and Solihull East. Steve Race is Labour MP for Exeter. Jamila Robertson, an entrepreneur, columnist for City AM, and Dorothy Byrne, former Head of News and Current Affairs at Channel 4. She is now the President of Murray Edwards College, Cambridge. That's a great job title, I think. By the way, it's her who's done it before. They are here to answer your questions on 0345 6060 973. I think so far this is the most newsworthy week of the last few months, so there's so much to talk about tonight, and it's up to you to set the agenda. You can WhatsApp us on that number, you can text 84850, you can say Alexa, send a comment to LBC, and you can even email ian@lbc.co.uk, and don't forget the extra I in Iain, and of course watch us on Global Player. Enough.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Right, well, let's start off with a WhatsApp question from David, who says, if politicians reverse bad decisions, should we not treat them with more respect than the ridicule they receive from the media and the public? Dorothy Byrne, I'm going to come to you first.
I agree. I think it was right to reverse this decision. I think most people think that. I could ridicule them a bit that it took them so long to realise, but it was a mistake. The fact that you didn't get it if you were not on pension credit, and we know that 700,000 people eligible for pension credit don't claim it, and the income you had to have to get it was so low, and we know that the amount of the average energy bill is about £1,800. I, as somebody who gladly gave up my winter fuel allowance, thought too many people had it taken away, but it was ridiculous before. When I first received my letter from the British government telling me that I was getting winter fuel allowance, I actually rang the office because I thought it was a mistake and said, oh, hello, it's Dorothy Byrne here. I'm the Head of News and Current Affairs. I think there's been a mistake. You're apparently giving me a winter fuel allowance. And they said, well, that's because you're really old. And
I'm sure they didn't.
No, but they explained why. And I said, oh, really, I really get it, even although I'm working. And they said, yes. And I said, but it's taxable, isn't it? And they said, no, it's not taxable. And that was ridiculous. So it was right to do something, but they did it in the wrong way, and it was right that they U-turned.
But they haven't done it yet. And from my point as a political commentator, I just think if you're going to U-turn on something, do it, get it over with, and then hope people forget it in 4 years' time.
It's more like a dog leg, when you're in a taxi.
They're not going to do it till October, which means that people won't be able to claim it in the coming winter. So you think, well, the cons of this... They need to
U-turn again.
Well, I think they may well have to. Steve Race, you've been marched up to the top of the hill by the grand old Duke of Starmer, and he's marched you down again, because you've had to defend this over the last 10 months.
Listen, I think sometimes the context changes as well. So we've had good economic news so far this year.
I knew that's what you were going to say.
Turning the corner, so you can take slightly different decisions. I'd push back a bit on changing these things ad hoc throughout the year. That's what we want to get away from. We want to do these things in a measured way and as part of a fiscal event, the budget, essentially.
Why? You don't. There's no law. There's no constitutional precedent that says you have to do this in a budget.
No, absolutely not. But we want to do things in an
So if you do it
ordered way.
now, then people can claim it this coming winter. I mean, it might be a terrible... I mean, the last winter, luckily, was fairly mild. But this next winter could be an awful one.
I mean, you might be privy to information I'm not, but I'm not sure it's true to say automatically that because it's in a budget in October, that people won't be able to benefit from that.
Well, and that's what Andrew Marr tells me, and I trust every word he says.
But I think, I think it's right that we listen, and I think there's obviously been quite a vibrant conversation in the Labour Party about this as well.
How vibrant have you been?
I'm persistently vibrant. All of my colleagues are, as you can imagine, as new MPs as well. One of the reasons we're in politics is because we've got very strong views on a whole range of issues. So I think there's definitely been a conversation. It's good, I think, that the Prime Minister sent this signal that.
But it is only a signal, isn't it?
It's a signal at the moment.
I mean, surely if you're going to say this, again, this is where I think the comms don't really work. If you're going to do it, surely you then have to tell people what you're going to do. And at the moment, we have no idea how this will be implemented. Are they going to raise the threshold from 11,500 to 12,500, which I suspect many of your colleagues would find that unacceptable? Is it going to be 15, 20, the higher rate tax threshold? Nobody knows. So there's going to be another 5 months of speculation.
Well, I just think we don't want to make these things up. So the government and the Treasury needs to go and work out what
well, don't announce it then until you've worked it out.
But I think it's right to send a signal. I think people are expecting to send a signal, and it's in a week where in a couple of months where the economic news, as I said, is improving, so we can make different decisions. Own across
improving. Inflation's doubled today.
Inflation hasn't doubled,
nearly
but it's gone up slightly because of the end of the. It's up to 3.5%.
2 to 3.8, wasn't it?
3.5.
Well, anyway, it's nearly doubled, and that's not good news.
It's a blip on the road, absolutely, but the OBR still thinks that the inflation rate will go down to around 2% by next year, and that is about stability. It is about not making ad hoc decisions. It is about not having 3 chances in 3 months. It's about stability for the economy, making firm decisions at the right times, but making sure that they are actually part of a wider package, that we know what we're spending and we're not overspending, which is what the situation we inherited from the last Tory government, I'm afraid.
Jamila.
I think Labour's spin is alive and well. I think that it's bizarre to announce that you're doing so well with the economy that you can U-turn on a terrible policy the day that the news comes out that inflation is now up to 3.5%. I think that's shocking. Obviously, with Rishi Sunak, we had got inflation down to 2%. So I think they do have a lot of gall.
It did go up to 11, though. I mean, let's remember that.
It did, but I mean, you can always look back. But I think where we left it is the point, right? We know that it went up, but we managed to get it back down, and now it's going up again.
But you left a 22 billion black hole.
Allegedly.
What's what the OBR? Well, no, the OBR said it's 9 billion.
Nine at most, and I think that's a big jump between 9 and 22.
So, okay, what would you do?
What about the winter fuel allowance? Well, I wouldn't have done it in the first place. And I think one of the problems is that you can't wait for 8 months when everyone is telling you for 8 months this is a terrible idea to then say, OK, potentially we might change it somewhere down the line. It's just kind of very wishy-washy, and it doesn't really kind of help pensioners sleep at night. So I think that they've got a lot of work to do.
Saqib, Bhatti.
I don't think the number 10 position is going to hold because, and I'm open to being corrected on this, but when they took the decision, it was a month before the budget happened. And it was a panic decision then I'm not quite sure what they were trying to prove. I came into politics. I believe our pensioners have the right to live in dignity. And, just before winter, they created a huge amount of anxiety. Keir Starmer has done this panicked announcement today, which is a half an announcement because we don't know how many people, where the threshold's going to be. So it's created more confusion. We don't know when it's coming in, and it's just making a bad situation really worse. And the only reason this has happened is because the Conservatives continuously and constantly held them to account and kept challenging them on this. Even when Labour MPs, marched through the voting lobbies to vote for this judgment, we said it was wrong then, and we need more detail from the Prime Minister.
Let's take a follow-up text from Olive in Sydenham. How far should this U-turn go? A higher threshold? If so, what? Or restoring the WFA for all pensioners? WFA, can someone enlighten me? I should know what that means.
Winter fuel allowance. It's not a hard one.
Okay, I've had a hard day. Let's start with you, Saqib, on that, because I think it is incumbent on the opposition to say, well, if you're criticising the government so vehemently on this, what would you do?
Look, I think, as Jamila said, we wouldn't have done it in the first place. Now the government, it's actually for the government to come up with this policy and explain with an impact assessment, because their last impact assessment said it would send 100,000 people, 100,000 pensioners into relative poverty. Sorry, I was getting a bit excited there. 100,000 pensioners into relative poverty. So the government has to come up with this. And to be honest, if Keir Starmer didn't have the figures today, why did he stand at the dispatch box and announce it? He's clearly panicking. And this government does not look like it's got any bit of control whatsoever.
Steve?
Well, I mean, that's slightly sort of full of chutzpah, I think, I'm afraid, on that. The government clearly is in control. I mean, for example, it's a political decision to keep the triple lock for pensioners, which is worth far more than the winter fuel allowance, and that came through for pensioners last month, the month before. The Conservative Party still won't confirm that they would keep the triple lock for the pension, which is worth, as I say, far more. So, you know, and did drop it when they were in government for at least 1 year. So...
I think we would have the triple lock.
Just hang on a second, because I do take your Labour government supporter hat off for a second. If you were in charge of this, what would you do now? Would you up the threshold? If so, roughly what to? Or is there a better system?
I think I would be loath to restore it to everybody. I think the point that Dorothy made is absolutely correct. I think a lot of people would say to me on the doorstep that they didn't want it and spent it on things that weren't energy bills. A lot of people would sort of say that. They gave it straight to their grandchildren, or they spent it on something for Christmas. But they're the particularly well-off kind of pensioners. So I think there is that group of pensioners that were just over the pension threshold, who had a small private pension, often from sort of manual jobs in the private sector over the years, and I think that those are the sort of people that we ought to be targeting.
Jamila?
No, I just wanted to correct Steve, because he said that the Conservatives hadn't confirmed triple lock, but we actually wanted to introduce the triple lock plus, which, whether you like it or not, is...
What does that mean?
So I think that it was an extra level of triple lock.
Why?
I don't know, it was Rishi Sunak's idea, but it just proves that we didn't go against...
Because Kemi Badenoch on this very programme put into question the future of the triple lock. I mean, she didn't say it would go, but she hinted that they were looking at it. And of course, Labour are all over that like a rash.
Fair enough, but I don't think it's fair to say that we didn't support the triple lock, because we were looking to improve it.
No, sorry, I said you're not currently committed to it.
Dorothy?
I'm the only one here who's old.
Oh, I don't know.
And you're quite old, but not as old as I am. And I do think, as the only old person here, maybe you do have to look at the triple lock. Is it right that I should be protected when the poorest in this land are not protected? As to what level you should put the threshold at, there is an argument that you shouldn't do it by threshold, that you should look more at doing it based on what level of council tax you pay. And I think that Martin Lewis has made that point very strongly, the man who should clearly be the Chancellor of the Exchequer. You don't agree?
No, I really don't.
Really? I think he often speaks more sense than any Chancellor of Exchequer we've had recently.
Well, let's not get into Martin Lewis. I just think sometimes he's far too populist. He says the thing that people want to hear.
Good.
Well, could it? I'm not sure it would be good. I mean, he has some sensible ideas. I'm not getting it. Well, no, I suppose I am getting at him a bit.
You have a lot.
But you could do it using the tax system, couldn't you? I mean, I think council tax is an arbitrary way of doing it.
Okay, but I think there may be other ways of doing it. But I would say to you, Saqib, that you say... the Tories wouldn't have done this. Do you really think it was right that I got a tax-free winter fuel allowance when I was head of news at a major broadcaster?
And being paid hundreds of thousands.
So that
not quite, but I did always give the money to charity. I would say that because I thought it was so wrong.
Well, that was very good of you, Dorothy. And the reason I say we wouldn't have done it is because consecutive Conservative chancellors had this put to them and they rejected it because they thought it was a non-starter. And look, means testing it is not an easy thing to implement, which is why it was done on a broad brush basis. So that's why I put the challenge to Steve in this case, but the Labour government to say, actually, how will they introduce this? Where will the threshold be? How much is it going to cost? And who's going to lose out on this? And I'm really against this kind of. I remember the debate when this first got announced, and I asked for the impact assessment at the time because the only real impact assessment I had was the Labour Party claim in 2017 that 4,000 people would die if you scrap the winter fuel allowance. So Labour members of Parliament were very defensive of it then. They voted for it. So I think they need to come up with the answers now.
But there are all sorts of benefits that people over the age of 60 get. I get a senior rail card, and I'm thinking, well, like Dorothy, I'm a reasonable earner. Why should I get 30% off my rail fares? Because I'm 60. The pension age is now 67. But no party is ever going to say to the electorate, "Oh, we're going to increase that," because you know what the reaction would be. And I'm sure there are other things that could be looked at as well. None of them want to go there. You can understand.
I do. I am old, and I agree with you. We oldies, we're too well treated if we've got money.
Yeah. But we have to remember that there are millions of pensioners in this country.
Don't have money.
Pensioners as an overall demographic of society are the richest demographic. But you try telling that to somebody who's sort of not getting anything apart from the state pension. So we do have to be careful.
I would just say be careful what you wish for, because Rachel Reeves has painted the whole of the Labour Party into this corner. She's taken bad decision after bad decision, and there are only bad options coming down the road. And she's going to have to all the things you're talking about. She'll be looking at this. And we saw the memo
Angela Rayner, certainly, isn't she? What did you make of that, Steve?
Again, I think it's right that people have this conversation. We want to have political conversation in cabinet. I think it's probably something that we've been lacking over the last few years. And then people discuss these options and come to a conclusion. But
they were all tax rises.
And they've not been implemented. So the Labour government, Labour government went into a general election, came through the general election with a large majority because the Tories had 14 years and were in a pretty bad position as a country. I don't think
it got a large majority because of the reform vote. Let's face it.
Got a large majority in the right places because that's how people voted within the system we have. I'm afraid.
But it wasn't. You with 33% of the vote, you can't regard that as an endorsement. Yes, it did give you a massive majority, so if you want to look at through that lens, fine. But if you look towards the next election, that's a pretty complacent attitude to have.
You play the game that you're with the rules that you're set, and I've got on record my support for electoral reform anyway. So I'd like to change the system, and then people will behave differently in that system. But if you remind me the original question, as we move away from electoral reform,
it's too late because we're going to a break. It's 18 minutes past 8. But if you'd like to ask about electoral reform, be my guest on. Actually, no, we don't want to talk about that, do we? 18 minutes past 8.
LBC.
Please apply.
Cross Question with Iain Dale. Watch live on both Global Player and the new LBC app.
8:20 on LBC. It's Wednesday's Cross Question. We have with us Dorothy Byrne, former head of news and current affairs at Channel 4, now president of Murray Edwards College, Cambridge. Saqib, Bhatti, Conservative Shadow Culture Minister and MP for Meriden and Solihull East. Steve Race is Labour MP for Exeter. There's a very famous Steve Race, isn't there? What did he do? Wasn't he a disc jockey or something?
Yeah. Composer and pianist.
Jamila Robertson is an entrepreneur, columnist for City AM, and was a Conservative candidate in last year's general election. Right, text question from Jonathan in Stockport. Is shifting away from sending people to prison and instead getting more criminals to do community service a dangerous move or a sensible way of solving the prison crisis? Well, ahead of the government-commissioned review of criminal justice by former Justice Secretary David Gauke being published tomorrow, His Majesty's Chief Inspector of Probation, Martin Jones, has told The Guardian that unless the probation system's ongoing failings are also fixed, then it will not be able to cope with the increased demand and the public will be put at risk by the significant dangers which some offenders pose being missed. Steve.
This is a very good question. It's very complex, I think. I think a lot of people going to prison come out worse. So I think either more criminalised, they certainly have their safety net and their social networks taken away, especially and that's particularly bad for people with short sentences. So I think we need to look at prison reform pretty seriously. We've got a very, very high proportion of people in prison. And I think over the last few years, we've gone to prison as a default, and it's not been working. We do need to look at reform the system. Certainly, the probation service needs to be better and to get that investment it needs. But prison can't be the only option we have for people. We need to look into rehabilitation. We need to look into getting people back into jobs and helping them to be productive members of society, which doesn't really work.
But these are all things that we've been debating for the last 20 years. And there have been some reforms. But isn't the problem... it all comes back to prisons being full. So if you don't want prisons to be full all the time, then it's quite simple. You don't send people to prison for minor offences and you find other ways of punishing them. But successive governments, whether they've been Conservative or Labour, prison has always been almost the be-all and end-all. And I think most people listening to this programme will think, well, yeah, I want longer sentences for people who commit serious crimes, but short sentences we know don't work. So what's the point in using them? You could probably reduce the prison population by 20,000 just by doing that. And that's before you try and get rid of all the foreign criminals and send them back to their own countries. So there seem to be obvious solutions to the general public, but they never seem to be implemented. How can you be confident that the system really will change?
Because I think we need to be confident in the politics of this. We need to be confident that we know what we want to do. And prison, as you rightly say, should be for those who we actually need to remove from society, long prison sentences for egregious crimes. And then we need to make sure that the prison system works for those people in those terms. But as you rightly say, short sentences essentially just destroy sort of lives further. And that's why we've got James Timpson in as a Justice Minister, looking at rehabilitation of prisoners. He's famous for the Timpson's sort of brand of taking on sort of ex-offenders and helping them integrate in society, giving them a sense of self-worth, giving them structure. And that's the sort of thing we do need to be looking at in this country.
Why appoint David Gauke to head this commission, given he was a Justice Secretary, and your party has spent the last year or so denigrating the Conservative record in justice? Well,
potentially. I mean, he is no longer a member of the Conservative Party. It's potentially because his party didn't listen to him.
Is that the qualification?
It's probably a good start or certainly if his ideas weren't taken seriously by the Conservative Party, we should be having.
I think that was on Brexit rather than justice.
Well, I think he's moved, or certainly the Tory Party has moved much further away from the likes of David Gauke and otherwise over the last few years.
Jamila.
in terms of prisons, I do agree that we definitely do need to look at reform. But one of the things we do need to do is stop putting people who don't deserve to be in prison. So free speech. People being arrested for tweets is absurd, and being put in prison for tweets is just ridiculous. And obviously, like you said, Iain, looking at foreign deportations, that's a huge one. Obviously, we also just need to build more prisons. And I know the Labour Party are looking to do that. And I think that is a good move in the right direction. But I do think review after review, like you say, what's the end goal here? Are we going to actually be implementing any of these ideas?
Okay, Dorothy?
Well, first, may I just say that I think that if somebody tweets that hotels which have migrants in them should be set on fire at a time of great civil difficulty in this country, they should be sent to prison. That is what prison is for. And they should be sent to prison because they deserve to be sent to prison, and also so that other people don't think that they can urge people to commit acts that would kill people. So we just need to get that straight. I think everything about our justice system is shameful. Our prisons are utterly shameful. When we talk about going to prison and rehabilitation, it's ludicrous. Our prisons are absolutely dreadful. And
well, not all of them. I mean, there are lots of new prisons that aren't.
A lot of them are dreadful, and people are not learning anything in them. I began my career as a court reporter, and the number one thing I saw was that when the defendant was asked to read out his affirmation that he would tell the truth, he couldn't read it because he couldn't read. Yep. It absolutely shocked me. Almost every man who came up was illiterate. So, and I think that what the Conservatives did when they privatised the probation service was terrible. So, one of you just said, we do need to have reform. No party ever seems to do anything about this. And the idea that we should say, don't send people to prison, they will be out doing community service. Who will be the people overseeing them? And if some of them have committed offences, who are these wonderful non-existent probation officers who are going to stop them going round to commit their 45th burglary? So I do think a lot of David Gore. I wait to see what he says, but all political parties in this country should be ashamed of their record on prisons.
Well, it's partly because, certainly in the last government, there seemed to be a different justice minister sort of every month. And there were one or two people in that. I mean, Michael Gove was one, Rory Stewart was another, who did have original ideas on prison reform, but before they had a chance to implement them, they were reshuffled off to another government department.
And I think Rory Stewart's book, in which he describes what it was like inside that ministry, absolutely appalled me. That it was so dysfunctional. And politicians of all parties seem to be terrified by the subject of criminals and never talk any sense about it.
Saqib, the gauntlet has been laid down.
Look, I think this is a really complex area, not least because some of your repeat offenders have some really complex needs and issues. I mean, Dorothy talked about illiteracy, you're talking about addiction, all sorts of different things. So, of course, you need a greater prison estate. And we were building prisons, one of them opened just after the election. Of course, that's important. I'm going to wait to see what David Gauke says tomorrow, because the rehabilitation aspect of this, clearly that's important as well, and we need to try and see. I don't want to be that typical politician that gives out slogans, but the root causes of this, and trying to see if we can tackle that, whether it's social issues or illiteracy or all the things Dorothy was just talking about, and how you tackle that. But just given, as you laid out the picture, government after government, these are really complex areas with really complex needs. Part of it, of course, is increasing the police force, making sure I'm fighting for a police station in my patch. all these things matter, and trying to make sure that especially young people stay away from crime. So I wish there was one silver bullet, but I'm going to wait to see that report tomorrow to see what the options
Well, I suspect it'll be our main subject on the programme tomorrow night. Thank you all for that. We've got lots of questions to come. If you'd like to add to them, you can ring 0345 6060 973. You can WhatsApp on that number, text 84850. It's 8:30 on LBC. Let's get the latest news headlines from Daryl Jackson.
The US President Donald Trump's played videos which he claims show allegations of genocide to his South African counterpart in the White House. Cyril Ramaphosa says he's never seen the video before. A member of the Irish rap band Kneecap's been charged with a terrorism offence in relation to the displaying of a flag in support of the Iran-backed group Hezbollah. 27-year-old Liam O'Haney is due in court next month. And Sir Keir Starmer's given the clearest indication yet that the government is prepared to U-turn on winter fuel payments. The Prime Minister's told MPs earlier he wants more pensioners to be eligible. LBC weather, light rain for south-east Scotland and eastern England tonight, a low of -1.
This is LBC.
Status.
Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
8:32 on LBC. Dorothy Byrne is here, former TV executive, now president of Murray Edwards College, Cambridge. Now, I hadn't heard of Murray Edwards College before you became president of it.
Well, I hope you've heard of it.
Well,
now.
I have, but
It's world famous.
What does it do apart from have you as president?
It's one of only 2 UK higher educational institutions for women, and it champions women. And every now and then people say to me, I don't think gender matters. Why would you have a women's college? And I say, when all the sexists and misogynists in Britain and the world agree with you, we won't need a women's college. But it's fantastic to have an institution that really sticks up for women and speaks out about the issues which affect women. And that's what we do. And we've just set up, you will be pleased to know, Jamila, an entrepreneurship programme for all women students at Cambridge University. And I disagree with one of Angela Rayner's changes, because it will affect entrepreneurs. So now I am a champion of entrepreneurs.
Excellent.
As well as an academic.
I like to hear that. Saqib Bhatti is here, Conservative Shadow Culture Minister, MP for Meriden and Solihull East. Steve Race, Labour MP for Exeter, and Jamila Robertson, an entrepreneur and columnist for City AM, former Tory candidate. Right, Robbie's in Chelmsford. Robbie, go ahead. Hi.
Good evening, all. What can and should the UK government do if the Israeli government continues to refuse to listen to diplomacy? And could and should this involve recognition of a Palestinian state at the UN conference next month?
Well, there's lots of things that the British government, I suppose, could do. Jamila, let's start with you on this. So this is a very difficult question, isn't it? And the government have trodden very carefully on this up to now. And then David Lammy made that explosive statement yesterday.
Yeah.
And that seems to have really changed not just the tone of the whole thing, but the substance as well.
Yeah, I feel like yesterday Lammy came out all guns blazing, and he really wanted to make a scene. And I don't know if that's necessarily the right approach. I think we do forget that Israel are our allies, and if we're seen to treat our allies in a way that isn't respectful, it does set a bad precedent.
Doesn't respect have to be earned?
But yeah, and absolutely, and I think there are concerns around aid. Last time I read that lorries had crossed the border, so that's good. But I think we're always very focused on Israel, and I'd be also interested to know how we get Hamas to stop and what their end goal is. I'm not sure anyone really asked that question.
Saqib.
I think the humanitarian issue in Gaza is really, really acute. And I was in the chamber yesterday and I was listening to Priti Patel, who was posing some really honest questions about how we get aid. And that has to be priority number one right now, because there is a huge risk of a humanitarian crisis in Gaza. But coming to the broader question, how you deal with this, and I'm kind of wary. This is a very, very old conflict, right? And I may not come up with the answer here on your show, but I think ultimately it will require the Americans to be an honest broker on this. It will require the Arab countries to be honest brokers on this, and find a way to work with Israel. We have to remember, of course, just before the October the 7th attacks, the rumour was that Saudi Arabia was about to recognise Israel, which was a huge move in line with the Abraham Accords, and all of that has been derailed. And clearly, in my lifetime, I'd like to see peace in the Middle East. I hope for that. I wish for that. But the way you do that, I think, is you have an international coalition working with Israel to do that. But priority number one has to be to get aid into Gaza. There is a humanitarian crisis unfolding. We have to make that happen.
But what about the question, which was what can the UK do if Netanyahu inevitably, says the questioner, doesn't respond to diplomacy? I mean, should we cease all trade? Should we use the RAF to drop aid, block F-35 parts? I mean, all of these things have been suggested.
I think the number one thing, if this doesn't work, is you have to work with the Americans to try and put pressure on to get aid in there. It's very easy to stand and get on the soapbox and talk about this, but the practical way to do this is to get the Americans to who the Israelis will listen to. We obviously have an incredibly strong relationship with. We want that. That is the way to do this. I think that's the realistic, practical way of doing this. If we're serious about getting aid into Gaza, and I think the challenge is pretty put to David Lammy were exactly around that. How are we getting aid in? And actually, we weren't getting the answers on this. We don't actually know how much British aid was going. All these things, and we've been asking that for quite a while. I was doing it when I was on the backbenches.
Dorothy.
Well, I don't think I would rely on Donald Trump to sort this out. He's the man who wanted to throw all the people of Gaza out of their own country and plant them in, I believe, Somalia or Libya. So I don't think he'll be the answer. Why are those lorries even on the border? And they're not in there. They're even on the border because Lammy, Keir Starmer, Macron, Carney did up the ante, but that aid is still not in there. So we need to do whatever we can. I think the idea of sanctioning individuals, the idea of denying parts, ending trade, possibly recognising Palestine. We have to do everything we can, because you had said that a humanitarian catastrophe was about to come about, potentially. It's here. It's now. Babies are starving because there's no baby milk, and their mothers cannot produce breast milk because they're starving. It's now, and we have to act. And I think the very strong language that politicians have used recently, they should have used before.
Why haven't they used that language against Egypt? Because Egypt won't allow aid through its border into Gaza, as I understand it.
Well, by all means, use it against Egypt as well.
All I'm saying is that everybody is understandably concentrating on what the Israeli government is doing, but there is a very large border crossing in the south of Gaza, which Egypt controls.
I would just say that Egypt is not the country which has invaded Gaza.
No, but it has the ability to provide humanitarian assistance.
And we can be critical of Egypt as well, but we mustn't get distracted here.
Okay. But Iain, I was going to say, it's not a distraction. I think the reality is, that's why I talked about the Arab nations. I think they all have a role to play on this. But all the things Dorothy listed, they can all be debated. But if there's a baby starving in Gaza today and tomorrow, those things won't get that aid through. That's why you have to work with the Americans to make that happen.
Steve?
Yeah, I mean, the humanitarian crisis is happening now. I think, the reference earlier on to a bit of aid going in, I think it was about 5 trucks. It's anywhere near the
I think, to be fair, it was 10, but...
10, fine,
okay.
Apologies.
Out of there are apparently
500 that should be going through.
Well, I think there are 9,000 waiting.
Exactly. The government can only use a tool once, and so as Israel has ratcheted up its behaviour and gone beyond what we deem acceptable in Gaza, thus we are ratcheting up as well. You can only use those tools once. You can only stop trade talks with Israel once. They are an ally, but we don't agree with their behaviour and what they're doing in Gaza, and we do need to see aid going in. We need to see a ceasefire. We need to see a peace process. That's the only way that you'll get security for the Palestinian people and the Israeli people.
But with what David Lammy did yesterday, doesn't that mean that effectively we now have zero influence on Netanyahu? I'm not sure we had much before anyway, but he clearly has reacted very badly to this. Now, we were doing it with the French, the Canadians, and I think 22 other countries have now signed up to it. So we're not doing it alone. But it means that the Americans are now the only game in town. And if they can't influence Netanyahu, then no one can.
I completely agree that the Americans are vital to this, and the Arab nations as well. But I think working in concert with other allies, we do need to put the pressure on Benjamin Netanyahu.
And how would you do that?
So I think there's more tools that we can use in the future, and we've set those out. There's more sanctions that we might want to lay on either individuals in the Israeli government or else across Israel in the future. But again, you only get to use those tools once, and so we have made clear that it's not just words. And actually, in reality, since this government came into power last year, we've changed the government's position to be very clear with the Israeli government, so supporting the ICC and the ICJ investigations into potential war crimes, for example.
Immediately announcing support for a separate Palestinian state, is that on the table now, do you think?
I think, again, we've committed that to that in our manifesto, but as part of a peace process, and so I'm working in concert.
Because other countries have done. Ireland has done it.
Some countries absolutely have, but again, we haven't seen an end to the crisis in Gaza or a peace process, so it has to be part of a peace process.
Right. Thank you for that, Robbie. Michael is in Rains Park. Michael, hello.
Good evening there, Iain. Good evening, panel. President Donald Trump presented the President of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa, with detailed evidence of the violence being perpetrated on white South Africans, including a video of Julius Malema, a South African politician, pointing to a stadium of 100,000 people, kill the white farmer. Yesterday, Elon Musk told Michal Hussein, Bloomberg Weekend's editor-at-large, that there are 140 South African laws discriminating against white South Africans. As the British media underreported this story, and can Keir Starmer take a firmer line on the South African government on this issue, saying that two wrongs the South African past make a right in 2025?
Well, in another Oval Office bust-up, reminiscent of the infamous Zelensky row, Donald Trump ambushed Cyril Ramaphosa over claims that South Africa is engaged in white persecution and even a genocide against white people, even showing a video clip. Unlike during February's awful meeting with the Ukrainian president, Ramaphosa remained calm throughout. Michael's got an interesting point there. Is this being underreported? Well, it certainly isn't now Donald Trump has stepped in, because anything that he does gets, some people might say, overreported. Saqib.
Yeah, I agree with you. I only saw the headline as I was coming into studio, so I'd be limited in what I can say about it. But certainly now that Donald Trump's done what he's done, we're going to have to take a look at this and understand exactly what is going on and clearly try and react. But I'd just say, we have someone in Donald Trump who is clearly quite strong in his views, and maybe that's an understatement. Dorothy will tell me off in a minute, I'm sure. But the reality is, we have to be a critical friend to the White House and try and, and if that is wrong, that story is wrong. We need to be honest about that and speak to him in a very honest term. That's what a critical friend would do. Otherwise, that's how you get value out of the special relationship.
Dorothy?
So the politicians quoted were not ANC politicians. One of them was a man who'd been specifically thrown out of the ANC, and the other was an opponent of the ANC. These were dreadful people, but this is not the policy of the ANC, and it is simply not the case that white farms have been seized. There is no evidence that white farms have been seized. Overwhelmingly, and this is covered, and I have covered it myself, the big problem of violence in South Africa inordinately affects black people. South Africa has a terrible problem with violent crime, and the chief victims are black people. There is no genocide against Afrikaners. That was absolute drivel. And I really like you, but when you say that if Donald Trump says something... I know, but I like you. But when you say that when Donald Trump says something, we have to look into it, that isn't actually how I react. I think, oh, there he goes, Mr. Bonkers.
I'm saying he's put it on the agenda, and look, like you, I'll openly admit I'm not an expert on South African politics, so I take what you take very seriously, very seriously, and I'll probably go look at that as well.
Steve?
I saw the clip, and I thought Ramaphosa seemed to react very calmly, but also Trump moved on very, very quickly to talking about a plane and mentioning that he couldn't get a plane off South Africa. So also Donald Trump moves on to different topics quite quickly, and I think we need to be very careful about giving some of what he's doing, which is often clearly a tactic and a deliberate tactic, too much airplay. I don't think there is a genocide of white people. I think it's in South Africa. I know that there's a conspiracy that is being kind of got up, and I think we need to be very careful when we discuss it.
Jamila?
It's interesting. When I saw it, it did kind of give me flashbacks to poor old Zelensky, and I don't know if I would go and hang out with... I don't know how many leaders are going to want to go and hang out with Donald Trump
they all do.
In the Oval Office. Well, yeah, you're right. But I think the question was really interesting in that it hasn't really been reported, and I think I probably speak for a lot of people who watch the news and do want to see a bit more variation, and I think there's so much going on in the world, and I only ever see the same kind of 4 stories.
You're absolutely right, and Dorothy, you must have a view on this, because I get really frustrated that in order to get good foreign news coverage now, I have to turn to Al Jazeera English.
You should turn to Channel 4, which has for 25 years made a programme called Unreported World, which goes out regularly.
That is true. But you would admit there isn't a lot on British television.
We always covered stories which other people didn't cover. And we would deliberately look. And I can remember making a film. Here's one we invaded earlier. Because when everybody looked at Iraq, we made a film about Afghanistan. When everybody looked at Afghanistan, we made a film about Iraq. I absolutely agree with you, Jamila, that you just see the same stories and journalists follow each other's agenda, and we have to have our own agendas, and there should be far more coverage of Africa generally. I'm really disturbed that so many children think that Africa is a country, not a continent. And indeed, the British Museum, Africa's in the basement, all jumbled up together, as if a child had put it there.
I think, Dorothy, I think you're absolutely right. And there's a lot happening in Africa on the continent that we're not talking about. Russian disinformation, for example, is rife across the continent. That's going to have real-world problems for us in the future. But also the humanitarian crisis in Sudan, for example, and the civil war there. What's happening in Rwanda as well, and the sort of encroaching sort of war on its borders. There's a huge amount going on that we don't necessarily see enough. What I'd say is it's a criticism of rolling news.
You would hear about the war in Congo. You would hear about the war in Sudan. if you listen to this programme, because we have covered it extensively.
I was going to say, I think it's a criticism of 24-hour rolling news rather than sort of media platforms. I know, for example, that the BBC did very in-depth programmes on the Uyghurs about 20 years ago, long before there was a mainstream conversation about it.
Channel 4.
As did this programme.
Exactly.
We even did a 20-minute documentary. For us to do a documentary, that's quite something on the Uyghurs, and it was before anyone else did. But
I'm sure you were there first.
We won't get into a competition, Dorothy. Much. Right, we've got our fun question to come. They're all looking for... In fact, 3 of our panel are debutantes, and they didn't even know about the fun question. Good luck, ladies and gentlemen. It's 10 to 9.
This is LBC.
Love.
Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
8:51, Dorothy Byrne, Saqib, Bhatti, Steve Race and Jamila Robertson here taking your questions. Michael in Northwood has sent in this by text. The government is considering sending water company bosses to jail over the polluting of our rivers and seas. Is this the right way to deal with this outrage? Well, the Environment Secretary, Steve Reed, has written an article for the LBC Views section of the new LBC app today, in which he says that the threat of time behind bars or a hefty fine will ensure water bosses' minds are focused on cleaning up our rivers, lakes and seas, rather than lining their own pockets with bonuses they didn't deserve. Well, strong words there, Steve Race. Is that the right way to attack this?
Yeah, absolutely. This is why we've got the Water Special Measures Bill that were passed through Parliament recently. And you will have seen potentially today that since we got into government last year, prosecutions of water companies are up 145% as well. So it's pretty disgraceful what's been happening across the country with water companies sort of spewing sewage into our rivers. It happens in Exeter a lot with South West Water, one of the worst performing water companies in the country, and it's time that they need to sort their act out. Now, years of underinvestment as well, so we need to sort that out, but there's plenty they can do and get on with it, basically.
Playing devil's advocate here, is there a risk, though, that if you go down the route of sending people to jail, no one will actually want to do those jobs?
Potentially, but I think the vast I've worked in business before, and the vast majority of people want to do the right thing and want to work within the law. And I think the laws were not being they weren't strong enough, and B, they weren't being enforced. So I think they thought they could get away with it beforehand, and now they can't. So we need those stronger measures to make sure that they stay on the straight and narrow and sort their act out.
And how can you encourage more investment in the water industry? Because when it was the ostensible reason for privatising it was not to introduce competition. It was to get private sector investment in. And in the first 10 years, there was a huge amount of investment. Yep. And then private equity and the Australian Macquarie company came in, and it's all been a disaster since then. That's impossible to reverse overnight. I think everyone understands that. But as a long-term strategy, by which I mean over 5 years, how can you change the system?
Well, it's about making sure that the regulations around the system allow them to invest and make sure they can get a decent return, and that's absolutely right for the investment that they put in. But it's not about lining the pockets. It's not about taking all the money out of the system, sending it over into dividends, whilst providing a basic or a failing service. And so this is why we need to make sure that the floor is raised for the entire industry to make sure that they sort their act out while still delivering clean water and sewage services for residents.
Jamila.
No, it's a really interesting question. I think something like an investment threshold would be a really good idea, that you can't get your bonus until a certain amount has been invested that year. But I definitely do agree that fines are the way, and they should be personal fines that the CEO is liable for, because I think pain is the best way to make sure people do what they're meant to do. I don't think necessarily sending more people to prison is the solution, as we've already discussed.
Okay, Dorothy?
Well, politicians are the big failures, so maybe we should send all of them to prison. So if they turn around and say, we're going to send a few water company evil bosses to jail, that might sound really good in a tabloid paper, but ultimately the people who are to blame are the politicians who privatised it. And if you're going to privatise it, you have to regulate it so that this could not happen, and they are ultimately the people to blame. And I wouldn't send them to jail. I would make them clean out sewers.
I'm trying to remember who the cabinet minister was in the late 1980s who privatised water, and whether they would be physically capable now of doing that.
We'd all help them.
Would we? Speak for yourself.
Push them in.
Saqib.
Look, I think a lot of this falls on the shoulders of the regulator, and Ofwat needs to have more teeth. I gave my maiden speech in the second reading of the Environment Act in 2020, which is, I'm sure you read and saw, Iain.
Absolutely.
But I was on the bill committee, and part of that was to ramp up the requirements of water companies to have more data. So the reason we have all this information now is because of the decisions we took while we were in government. We also ramped up fines. Look, but I think that Ofwat, I've constantly thought this, that they need to have much more teeth, and they need to be much more effective. And I think that's the way you make sure.
But they can only have the teeth if you as politicians give them the teeth, and clearly successive governments haven't given them the teeth.
And we've been ramping that up. But of course, look, there are too many water companies that aren't living up to their obligations. So it's right to have this debate.
Is anybody hopeful that by the time of the next election our rivers will be cleaner than they are now? Because I think it is rivers that get people really exercised. I mean, I think we've always known that there's been effluent going out into the sea. That's happened for decades. But rivers really get people annoyed. The Liberal Democrats have really made this a big thing, haven't they?
Well, I would say South West MP. I think the sewage and seas has a massive impact on our tourism economy and the national and international view of us. So actually, the seas make my residents particularly angry. I think we will absolutely see an improvement. From what I understand, and I've done a bit of work with Surfers Against Sewage in the past and others, especially in the water sector, they can actually do a lot more without the investment, and they should be doing that. But what I would say also is, I have been in a sewer. I went into the...
You're a politician, of course.
Exactly. Constantly in the sewer. I went into the super sewer under the Thames before it was sealed recently, which is an absolute marvel of engineering. It's absolutely brilliant. And that was an interesting sort of finance model between government, Thames Water and bill payers in London. That will have a phenomenal impact on the cleanliness of the Thames, which is very
Right, let's move on to our fun question. It's from Ben in Warrington. A brand new massive theme park has opened in Florida today, aiming to rival Disney World. What's your favourite theme park or even fairground anywhere in the world? Steve?
I'm going to refuse to say the new one that has been brought to the UK by the Labour government with Universal in Bedfordshire.
I think you just did.
No, I have very fond memories of going to the Florida Disney World with my family, with the Make-A-Wish Foundation. My sister was born with severe disabilities, so we got to go with them. So I'd love to go back there, not least since the Star Wars site has been put in since I last visited. So I'd love to go there.
Jamila?
I'm a bit of a wimp, so I never say a roller coaster. I go for the log at Thorpe Park because it's safe.
You're not tied into the log.
Do you get a bit wet though?
Saqib.
Growing up, we spent a lot of time as a family at the Safari Park in Kidderminster, and I remember, I've got so many good memories of that. Lots of memories of monkeys ripping off the water washer off of the Nissan Micra that we were in, and plenty of other stories I won't repeat on the radio. But in the near future, I'm actually going to Euro Disney. I haven't decided if I'll take the kids yet, but it'll be good fun.
Dorothy.
I would like to create a theme park, and I would like to create the world according to Donald Trump. And you would go in, and it would be this bizarre parallel universe, and I think it would be very popular.
Well, there's a thought. I'm nominating Wicksteed Park in Kettering, because that's where I used to go as a child, as long as there are no children there. I mean, that's the disadvantage of theme parks,
Do you
isn't
not
it?
like children?
Not really, no.
What about your niece who you mentioned?
Oh, no, I like my nieces, but they did call me Uncle Herod for many years, which probably tells you all you need to know about me. Thank you all very much indeed for coming on the programme tonight. Now, there's no cross question next Monday because it's bank holiday and I'm too lazy to work on a bank holiday. So on Tuesday, the journalist and author David Aronovich is going to be here, the former Conservative Cabinet Minister Lucy Fraser, the editor-in-chief of joe.co.uk, Ollie Dugmore, and the Daily Telegraph columnist Ella Whelan. But coming up in the next hour, Adoption UK says families are at breaking point and cuts to support funding for adoptions are morally and economically nonsensical. Well, a growing number of adopted children are at risk of returning to the care system as funding cuts and lack of support pushes England's families into crisis, according to adoption charities. So I want to investigate this over the next hour. If you've recently adopted, I want to hear your experiences of the adoption system. Has it become more difficult to adopt? And what are the barriers that are put in people's way? And do you receive enough support after the adoption has taken place? 0345 6060 973.
On your radio, on the LBC app, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, Donald Trump's played footage which he claims shows allegations of genocide in South Africa, while the country's leader Cyril Ramaphosa